Hello and welcome to Life My Way. My name is Sabelo. In this channel, I discuss my life choices, whether good or bad. Hopefully, you can learn something from it. So, in today's episode, I'm looking at how I did the minor service for my car. Well, this car I've been driving it for over 16 years now. It's actually life and blood of mine. First thing I did was to make sure that I jack the car and also put the jack stand. You don't want to be squeezed by your own car. And of course, another option, you can also add a wheel to make sure that it is well balanced. So in doing this minor service, I first removed the bolt that is in the sump where the oil is, and then drained most of the oil. And then I went on to remove the oil filter. It was very hard to remove it, so I used a tool here that is designed to actually help you remove the oil filter. After it was loose, I then went on to unscrew it, making sure that I also have a container of mine, which is, by the way, an old container for oil that I've cut to make sure that it's easy to collect the dirty oil that is now coming from the car. And of course, make sure that it doesn't spill over your face as you are busy removing the old oil filter. And by the way, one of the ways to know if your car requires a service is if the oil is very dirty. You will see this when you check the oil using the dipstick on top, of course, of the engine. If the oil becomes too dirty, you certainly need to look at changing or doing the minor service, which includes the spark plugs, the oil filter, petrol filter, and the air filter as well. And of course, you might also want to remove the pollen filter for the air conditioner inside the car. With that out of the way, I left the oil draining from the sump and also from the oil filter location. And then I went on to change the spark plugs and put in the new ones. And of course, the old ones were quite clear that they needed to be changed. Although I wasn't really feeling much on the car, but after looking at them, after changing them, I realized that they definitely required changing. And of course, getting into the spark plug requires you to remove quite a number of bolts in the top cover, which also contains the air filter, which is the air that needs to be filtered there for the engine when it actually burns the petrol inside the pistons. So I went on to tighten those spark plugs. Make sure that you tighten them enough so that they don't just get loose, but not too tight that you start cracking the actual engine. Because if you do crack out or disturb the threads of your spark plug, you might actually be in big trouble, because now the whole engine needs to go back to engineering to recreate those threads, which is quite a tedious exercise to do and might be quite costly as well. Okay, so I went on to tighten all of the 4 spark plugs I have, make sure that they are well tight and they are good to go. And as mentioned, not too much that you crack it, but of course not too lately that it can pop when it's moving. So with that out of the way, I then put back the cables that now needs to connect into the spark plugs. These cables, they come from the distributor, where they are producing, think of electricity that is being used now by the spark plug to burn or do the combustion within the engine as the car is moving. You need to put the cables exactly as you remove them. The good thing about these cables is that they are created in a manner. The smaller one is short all the way to the longest one on the far left. There's no way you can make a mistake when you put those in. And of course, these cables and the whole entire component just touches the plug. So there is an extra screw that you now need to put on to make sure that all of these components that you are putting now, they are actually indeed touching the plugs. So tighten those nicely, and of course, as usual, don't tighten them too much. Just make sure that they are strong enough not to get loose when the car is moving. The next item I replaced was the air filter. So the car, when it burns petrol, it needs clean air. that goes into the engine. So the air filter is actually used for cleaning the air that goes to the engine. So you also need to replace this as part of your service of the car. So I replaced this on top, and of course there are extra covers that goes with it to make sure that it's well tight and it doesn't move. So, and also as part of replacing this, you need to dust off all of the dust that might be there, and make sure that there's nothing that might disturb or cause harm or havoc or any issues into your car. Part of unscrewing the car is to make sure that you remember where you put all of the bolts and also where you remove the bolts from. And when you put everything back, put everything exactly as it was before, because missing any screw or putting something not as it was before, it might start to cause problems. You don't want to be causing more harm while you're trying to do just a minor service of your own car. Okay, and make sure that everything is well tight and well fitted exactly as it is supposed to be. As mentioned, you also need to make sure that all of the screws that were removed before, they are there, including the cables that you might have disconnected as part of removing the top cover. Very important that everything is tight as it's supposed to be, because if something is not as tight, as the car moves and start vibrating and you go on different roads, gravel and off-road, most of the things will start to get loose if they are not tight enough. Okay, of course, I put everything as it was. So in this moment, I was putting back now the connection for the air as it comes from the air filter down into the engine through the carburetor to collect the petrol and then into the pistons. So that is where it actually bends and create a combustion for the petrol burns and the car to start moving forward. I then went on to tighten the top cover now that contains the air filter, and make sure, of course, that everything is well put and it's tight. And of course, don't tighten it too much, because you might end up causing more cracks and more issues into your own car. Okay, and of course, as mentioned earlier on, the minor service is just the oil filter, air filter, petrol filter, the oil itself, and the spark plugs as well. You might also add your air filter pollen, which is inside the cabin hole. That is where the air conditioner passes through to filter the air coming through to your car inside. With that all out of the way, I then went on to replace the petrol filter in my car here in Mazda 3 Sport 1.6 Dynamic 28 model. That is on the right wheel at the back, so I had to remove the wheel there to be able to get to the petrol filter. What I found very useful is that it's easier to remove the pipes while it's still inside. So after that is removed, then you're able to take it out. With the petrol filter out, you need to make sure that you replace it exactly as it was in the housing, so that you don't get the input and the output wrong when you put your petrol filter back into the car. So with all of that in place, I'm ready to put it back and then put the cables or the pipes back exactly as they were. And of course, do remember where the input and the output is. So all of that was just to make sure that I keep the car draining itself in terms of the old oil, and all of that out of the way. I put back the bolt for the SAM, but also the new oil filter, and I started to put the oil. Very important that you keep the oil in the level that is recommended by the car. Do not try and drown your car or try to put more oil, think that's going to go for longer without changing the oil. Put the oil at the level that is actually required. It turns out that the car moves much better. So with all of that in place, I went on to test the car to see if it starts. So the first time you're starting it does take some time. You feel like it's not going to start because there is no more petrol now in the pipes. The petrol pump needs to get the petrol from the tank, goes through the petrol filter and all the way into the engine. So that might take some time and a bit worrying sometimes if it does take long to start. But of course, once that is started, it will now run smooth going forward. Very important to actually check thoroughly while the car is on and is just idling, to see if there's no bolts are missing there, that there's nothing that is actually bad. Okay.